I discovered a really interesting phenomenon here in the Pacific Northwest, and I want to see whether this is happening everywhere or if this is just here, because I don't recall this being a thing in Phoenix, and it almost would have made as much sense, if not more, to me. In my apartment complex, initially is where I saw this, where I will walk by and there will be just 5 to 7 people within the course of 50 cars, all just sitting in their car with the car on, bumping music, like watching videos on their infotainment screen, or having very loud phone calls. Like, there is some cat who sits out here just having calls in his car, and when you hear the other person speaking back to them, it shakes the ground. It's like a fucking Tyrannosaurus Rex is doing a Skype call with this motherfucker in their car. And I'm like, well, it's cold and it's rainy, so maybe that's an explanation, and maybe they're waiting for their car to warm up, but it's not snow.
Yeah.
And you are literally 5 to 15 feet from your doorstep, depending upon wherever you're parked. So I don't get it. But then I go into parking lots. I cruise down to the Safeway. I'm going down to the Fred Meyer. I'm bopping into any number of food places to pick up people just sitting in their cars in the Piggly Wiggly. Not the H&M, because I've only seen one of those in my travels here thus far. But, yeah, just folks just bombing in their car, just hanging out, you know, pumping exhaust up into the air, really kicking the greenhouse gases up as much as possible. And I don't know, have you all seen this happening?
I have only seen that in the parking lot of my daughter's school. And that is just because people are they're too lazy to get out of their cars, and they're waiting until school has been released to get up and walk there. But other than
the pickup I can understand. The pickup I can understand. The grocery store confuses me a little bit.
Yeah.
But outside your house, I'm kind of on board with that, because I can certainly envision a time where, like, I'm coming home from work, if I didn't work from home anymore. And before going in, I just need that 5, 10, 15 minutes to myself to, like, decompress, because I've been at the office or whatever. I've, worked my shift, and now I'm about to go in there with the 18-month-old and, the family and all that. And it's like, maybe I just need that 10 or 15 minutes to zone out, have some music or whatever. Yeah. So I can kind of see, like, just that little, like, woosah moment.
All right. To give further context, I also have seen people who sat there I tracked one because it's a younger lady. She was in there for 4 hours. I think she was sleeping in the car. And, granted, there's different circumstances for that. So maybe it is someone who's literally just hanging out and living in their car. And that's another thought.
Yes.
And I have also been on phone calls in my car and not want to try the transfer to hands, or deal with trying to, move stuff over. So I'll just hang out in the car and finish my phone call and then get out as well. So, like, it's not unprecedented and not completely without, logic. But at the same time, it's like, there's such a proliferation of people doing it that I'm like, are we this isolated now? Like, the boy in the bubble's just out, we're in our little hamster balls just bumping against each other out in the world, that we just can't even be bothered to get out of our cars now.
Well, I spent a long time in Texas, and even now still in Virginia, so both kind of more conservative states. Mm-hmm. Is there still, like, mask mandates and whatnot out there for the Pacific North?
I mean, it's the Pacific Northwest. So most of the places I've seen, it's like they suggest we would politely ask, or, don't give anybody. The best one is at the library that Melissa works at, where it is saying, it's like, please don't harangue anybody else for their choices. It's like, we're all adults here, and if someone chooses to still wear a mask, like, don't accost somebody because they're trying to be courteous.
Well, I was thinking if there was, like, a mandate or something, maybe that's also part of it, of like, I don't want to go in with regards to the grocery stores.
Let me finish. Fair.
Let me finish doing what I'm doing before I go in and buy the groceries. So I was thinking maybe that tied in with it some.
Like the Fred Meyer I went to the other day, once I finally got my car back, there's another story. The two people next to me, I pulled into a parking spot, both people on either side of me, just hanging in the car. One had his feet on the dash, like, kicked up, like he was, like, taking a small 5-minute vacation in the front seat of the car, and the lady next to me was, like, on the verge of sleeping.
Now, this is something I have to ask, like, for both of you and your cars, are your seats comfortable? Where you would rather sit in that car as opposed to moving the 10, 15 feet inside to sit in a comfortable couch, comfortable chair. Because my car isn't. You
answered your own question because you said, sitting versus moving, and I was like, you lost me at moving.
I'm moving 15 feet to your beautifully sculpted for your ass chair, as opposed to the chair that is filled with dust or something to that effect.
So I'm gonna circle back to what I mentioned earlier. So in my car, I've got my heated seats, I've got my AC, I've got my music, and it's got the nice little ass groove and stuff, right? So yes, my couch is comfortable as well, but in my car, I don't have anybody climbing over me. I don't have anybody screaming for Miss Rachel to be put on YouTube.
I forgot I did have a counterpoint to yours, and I was going to say that the alcoholic in me is saying, well, that's what bars are for on the way home from work, but that's neither here nor there. But
very telling.
If you're sitting outside, okay, granted, let's say that you can have that same sort of alone time, because we can kind of assume that at least a good chunk of people that are sitting in the cars in the Pacific Northwest don't have an 18-year-old that's just ready to.
I don't have an 18-year-old climbing on me.
Sorry, month, 18-month-old.
We suddenly went to a strip club daddy instead of a actual father.
He doesn't need to bring up the previous stories of him going to a strip club. We already have an hour's worth of that.
Yes, Debbie 2 times. Yes, I got it.
But an 18-month...
Chloe Dancer, I'm sorry. I totally forgot my crown of thorns.
An 18-month-old ready to just climb and overall just mess with your train of thought, right?
Yes.
We can assume that most people don't have that, right?
The music does sound pretty good in a car too, though. So, theoretically, you might want to bump your tunes.
Yeah, I'm living
car.
in an apartment complex, so yes, you might want to just for noise control, just enjoy some joys in the parking lot. And maybe perhaps you have some folks who are sitting and enjoying a podcast like this podcast.
What?
And so I would say to them, by the eternal, behold. It's the Disinformed podcast. I'm Shane, and Michael's not going to say anything because his eyes were just glazed over as he was just waiting for me to be fucking finished so he could speak, as according to an episode that I listened to very recently.
Oh no, I forgot you do listen.
Yeah,
except for I said you listen.
And you said I'd listen.
And you'd
you
be disappointed.
Son of a bitch. Your eyes glaze over and you just, and see, I wanted to give you a soupçon of having a conversation that doesn't take 18 minutes before a fucking intro happens, and to have an intro that engaged the other, folks who are going to be a part of the show. And see, you were there chomping at the bit, ready to just say your name. And no, you don't get the privilege this time. Shut the fuck up.
I'm sorry, Daddy.
I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Sorry,
Go
Daddy.
ahead. No, I'm Shane.
and I'm Michael.
Thank you. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's just a weird phenomena. I'm still a bit nonplussed by it. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons. It's just, I think the sheer volume I'm encountering is what stupefies me.
I definitely, I would be surprised if this did occur in Phoenix, given especially when it's not winter. When it's, fall,
for
summer,
the heat,
spring.
It would make sense of Jesus Christ, I'm not walking out into the oven. I just want to hang out in my car for another 15, 20 minutes, particularly around ASU. Okay, this makes sense. I'm in Tempe. If I'm in fucking lot 6, I don't want to have to take the 20-minute walk to class yet.
Chill me down. Okay, and go.
Fortify me against the environs, but yeah.
The car is new. In Texas and here in Virginia, there's a lot of people that so in the apartment complex I lived in Texas, a lot of people would sit on the stoops and have Ghetto Blaster playing whatever tunes they had from and hanging out. But and a lot of people sit on their porches here in Virginia and it becomes a little social gathering as various neighbors and people walking by. My neighbor seems to know everybody that lives in this bloody city because, cars will just be driving by and they'll honk and he'll wave at the car. And then people will just be randomly walking by and they'll, Artie!
So he's the mayor of Quahog.
I was going to say...
You have a mayor too. I see. Okay. And not the one that you spent time rubbing elbows with.
That's right. But
the real mayor.
But I haven't seen anybody hanging out in their cars, but I do see a lot of people like outside, which surprises me both here, but especially in Texas. Cause like I'd go outside, there'd be a big group of gathering of people just like hanging out, sitting by the stoops and like playing their music and stuff. And I'd be like, man, it's fucking hot outside. Why are you out here?
It's also humid. I mean, I'm assuming because I haven't been to Virginia, but like it's fairly humid where you're at, right?
Yeah, it's in Virginia. Yeah, not so much in Texas.
Okay,
although
that's
like,
fair.
yeah, the humidity
Depending.
never really like impacts me as much. Like, because people talk about, oh, well, yeah, you moved to Virginia and yes, it's like 10, 15 degrees cooler than Texas, but it's so much more humid. So it feels worse. Not really. I much prefer like 15 degrees cooler, but a more humid environment than the dry heat, but 15 degrees hotter.
See,
depends on how much hair you're trying to maintain.
That, and also depends on if you're in the shade, because I would rather have 110, 120 degree heat, no humidity, because I can get out of that by walking inside. Whenever I go to a place that's humid, that's more than like 20% humidity, I'm swimming. I cannot get over it no matter how cool or hot it is. It is just stifling.
And see, you say that, though. One of the things I absolutely loathed about Lake Havasu, and different from like Phoenix heat, Lake Havasu was a saturating heat. So like you'd walk in when it was 126. The first 15 minutes that you were in a fully air-conditioned space, you still felt like you had been baked for 4 hours. Like it just stuck with you. So it would drain, like leached all the energy out of you. I never felt that way in Phoenix. Like I'd be hot, but I would like Havasu was oppressive for some reason. I just,
I mean, Lake Havasu, it's not
sea level,
massive,
but
but it's still big. So definitely, especially like when you're close to the shore, I can imagine there being like a good amount of humidity, just sitting there, just soaking in it. So swimming, if you will.
Well, I was swimming when I got my car. So if I didn't, so to impart that I've had some fun circumstances over the past little bit, but as we were running through the cycles of the most recent weeks, this is where I'm going to get into the fact of like, do we want to get weird for a second?
Ooh, weird me.
So I know how you feel about spectral activity there, Michael.
No, not that weird. Not that weird.
No, we're not going to get too crazy weird, but I'm going to tell you a story. And I feel like it is germane to my point when we get around here, just for wrapping up, one, the greater conversation we can expand into. But just, I'm going to get a little doc for a moment here and talk about the time I rode the train in Saskatchewan. And the various onlookers I encountered and my fallouts with them. But
I feel like you're trying to insult me, but really you're just captivating me with the upcoming story.
That's what I'm trying to do. I'm pulling you in.
Go on.
Spin me this yarn of yours.
Like a moist slot bound for insertion. So let me pivot.
It's getting humid in here.
Swampy, in fact.
Case of the vapors.
My brother, when I was editing his book, included a story from our childhood, which it's apocryphal and my family loves telling it because it speaks to kind of the man that I was to the child I was to the man that I became. And when I was probably 6 or 7, maybe 9, depending, I forget when it actually happened, we used to have to go out and cut wood because we lived in, the mountains and we needed to maintain heat in the winter and it would snow up in the White Mountains. So we would go on wood cutting expeditions and we had this old clunker Chevy truck that we would take out and fill up all of the back. And my dad had built up these sort of spines on the back side of the bed to maintain all the wood that we needed to bring in. And in the midst of one of these wood cutting expeditions, we went over a particularly hilly terrain and my father thought he could navigate it with the truck.
Uh-oh.
He was wrong. We crashed into a pretty large rock bank. And from what I understand, because again, I was a child and a lot of this is just kind of like I was kicking rocks and walking around with having, they cracked the engine block.
Oh no.
Causing several portions of the engine to fall through several other portions of the engine. So there were fluids hemorrhaging all over the ground. There were things that were completely misaligned. I think like it was depicted as though like one of the axles had been just completely knocked off. So you're like, the wheels shouldn't be able to turn at this point. The engine shouldn't function. And we're sitting here and my dad's desperately, we have a full truck of wood. He's trying to get the engine to turn over and function. And we are probably 4 or 5 miles outside of town at this point.
So a good hike.
Yeah, it would have been hell. Now, I'm 1, a chubby kid, and 2, lazy as all hell. So when we get to the point that my dad's finally like, I don't think the truck is going to work. Like, we're going to have to pack things up. We've tried the paddles. She's not coming back. We're going to have to walk home. And then it was like, well, I don't want to walk. I was having a panic attack. And so my dad's like, well, I'll walk to the road, see if I can get somebody to come pick us up and then take us into town. And so from a child's recollection, I remember getting into the cab of the truck and praying that the truck would start. Now, this is a child, and this is the ardent faith of somebody who has not had life beat that out of them yet. So, and my brother told the story because it is baffling for him, who was a teenager at the time, because my brother's 5 years older than I am. He knew what was going on in that truck. Like, he was well aware that the fact that that thing should not function at all. So I finished my prayer, I got out of the truck, and I told my dad, try it one more time. So my dad, to shut me up more than anything, got into the truck. The thing started up. That truck ran from that moment until we got 5 miles into town, into our driveway. The second we crossed the threshold of our driveway, the truck died. Rolled to a stop.
They're like, thank you, Jesus. Sweet baby Jesus.
And to me, as a child, like, that was a really it gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because there is no rational explanation that I have found in the intervening time frame as to how that happened. Now, circumstantial evidence, or more than anything, because obviously the only thing I can point to as a kid who was there was just, obviously, it's my prayers what pushed that thing over. I mean, that was my brother's contention in the book. But as an adult, I always looked at that story with a cringe, because I hated the fact that, one, I'm not someone who fancies myself as religious. And one, like, that's the first thing that I will put forth as like let's put a stool here. Secondarily, like, it's circumstantial. There's so many other things that could have happened.
And the sheer hubris of it, if that's your belief, because it's like, so Jesus and God, they're up there and they're like, man, we got kids dying and starving and
like flies in children's eyes
Shane,
in Africa. Yeah.
Did you hear Shane though?
He doesn't want to exercise.
He doesn't want to walk the 4 miles back. On it, I got
you.
There's a white kid in peril. Please, let's stop the world. There's fighting. I mean, it's probably like 96. There's fighting in Somalia, but no. Let's let this kid not have to walk home. So yes, like, all of these things, it's fraught with peril to discuss this story. So, cut to, we take Maisie to the vet. We had to put her down. It was a really traumatic experience. Melissa had that dog for almost 14 years. So Melissa was distraught. And as I had pulled in to get gas earlier that day, and I had scraped my car because I went in the wrong way into the gas station. Uh-oh. So there was a pretty significant lip and arrows pointing out. So I'm an idiot for doing it. And so I'm like, fuck. But I filled up, went on about my day. As we are coming back up the hill, and this is a significant hill. One, it's raining, so we had a good downpour. We just had this terrible loss, so we are both like mentally fatigued, like totally shot. Melissa had just worked a full day of work and then came home to that, and it was a traumatic situation to get her to the vet. I'm not going to discuss that because we don't need to run that through, because I will go to pieces. I have cried on this podcast. It's not unprecedented.
It is known.
We're coming up the hill, and I look down at my instrument panel, and my check engine light's on. Now I'm going, okay. And just
Jesus,
to show,
take the wheel.
You joke, but just to show how ingrained certain things are in our formulative functions, I just said, please. The phrase left my mind. Please, God, just let me get to the fucking apartment. Like, I do not want to have my wife walking home uphill in the rain after our dog just died and we had to watch it. Like, I'm not prepared for this right now. Like, I can just, anything else is like, just please let me get this thing home. And it was shuddering a little as I went up the hill. And as I've said before, like, there's 30-degree inclines where we're around. So everything leads up to, we're on a hilltop. And we got to a pretty significant arc, and I'm like, this is the point where I just want to get past here. And it shuddered a little at the stop sign, and I'm like, oh, God, here we go. And then it held, and we made it up, and I'm like, okay, waiting for it. Got down through a little more of the general residential area, and then made it through the other stop sign, turned into our apartment complex, and I shit you not, we got in front of our apartment, and my car died. Immediately stopped like dead. And in my head, I went, I am going to be the newly reformed reverend of automotive peril. If you are broken down on the side of the interstate, put your hand on the stereo, and through this, like the medium of the podcast, I will revive your automobile through the power of my, association with the Detroit muscle car god. Gene Simmons and I will be able to conjure your car up from death. And then to Michael's point, like to Doc's point, the hubris of all of this is I'm just laughing in my head. I'm going like, this is fucking weird. And it died 3 times in the parking lot while I was trying to put it into a spot. Like, it just kept stalling out and stalling out and stalling out. I was like, I'm so elated that this didn't happen on the road. And then I start thinking about it, and this is like a joke Melissa and I have had for a while, and I realize I'm talking for a very long time, which is why I said I was getting into doc mode here. So I beg your condolences that I'm not letting anybody else talk. Sorry. But in the course of all this, in my secret heart, when Melissa and I have had these conversations, and I realize I railed a lot against organized religion on this show, but I don't think I've ever discussed, I would fancy myself more an agnostic than anything, because there's a pinhole of doubt that I cannot fathom how everything that has happened in the formulation of this universe, and here for physics with Mike, as we're getting into this, why ghosts to me are not completely outside their own possibility, because I don't empirically know. I don't have the hubris to believe that I can grasp the workings of the cosmos just from
that Jesus will take the wheel for you.
Yes, and that's, it's a fun sort of like interlude to get me into this point, was what I was thinking about as I was going through all of this, where I was like, it's so funny that my brain in that moment of peril, it did exactly what, the atheist's prayer of like, just, God, get me out of this and everything will be better. But it was just, in my head, I was joking, but it just mentally, I was not fortified at that point for that car to break down. And luck, sheer dumb, circuitous luck got me from that point to the exact point that I needed to get to. And I wonder how many people, would see that as an indication of God's intervention in our own life, or someone who would look at it and say, what a strange confluence of events this is, but who that could then persuade into saying, see, this is where, he touches you in your daily life, and the foundation of dogma and all of these other weird little, sort of trysts that we have with the cyclopean sort of juggernaut that is the creator, if there is one, or any of these other things. Like, how many weird missteps of the Oppenheimer I've become death, the destroyer of worlds, these weird little cataclysmic events that occur that we can attribute to something greater than ourselves, because we don't have the mental capacity to ascribe it to anything else, because we don't want to call it fate, you don't want to call it luck, you don't want to just say, these things happen, because you can't describe or you can't explain it sufficiently enough to go, okay, this is what it is, definitively. And I'll tell you why. But
that's only right now. I mean,
right.
The things that we can definitively explain now seemed like magic.
Yes.
100 years ago and 100 years before that, same deal, right? So, it's only a matter of time before we really do hammer home all the answers. I tend to also describe myself as agnostic with atheist leanings. But not because some sort of glimmer of like, I don't know, maybe more so because I tend to default to, I'm pretty sure there's nothing after death, that we're just dust in the wind. But I don't know for certain, because I don't know everything there is to know, because if I knew everything there is to know, would I not by definition be a god?
Uh-huh.
So...
And it's just funny, we can describe, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine.
It's one of the reasons I really appreciated some of the depictions of like, okay, well, religion or the idea of a soul is just sort of like a child's flashlight against fear of the dark, right? Like it's just how we sort of sate those inner stirrings in ourselves that this all has to mean something. So it's an interesting war with what we know empirically, what we can experience, what we can rationally explain, and then the things that we can't, where it's like preternatural or supernatural, like how we ascribe that to something. And like the peril or the pitfall of science versus religion is science, it concedes the point like, well, we can't explain that yet. And when you do that, that's like just expressing weakness to somebody who goes, well, I can just say it's this. My toaster said it was going to happen, and voila, Jodie Foster told me to do it. Like, so it's really funny for me going through those circumstances. So, Michael, for you, how do you feel about, like, would you call yourself, I know you're a Satanist, but what are your feelings about sort of like spirituality in general, or how you look at these things? Not to get too existential.
Oh, no. It's something I do think about from time to time, mainly just to remind myself where I'm at. I don't think about those things because I feel that I don't have enough information to give an answer. As
Science.
For
Exactly. Yeah.
Textbook. Yes.
It's not a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, ghosts, I choose not to believe in them only because it's something that we should be able to, with all the evidence that has been presented, as we have done through other, After Darks and stuff like that. It's something that should be recreated, because that's the basic premise of science, is that these physical laws, they can be recreated. There is some
and so many hoaxes have been discovered.
Yes, yeah. But like, will I sit here and say that ghosts aren't real and tell someone that till I'm blue in the face? No. It honestly, at the end of the day, which is a phrase that I don't like saying, because I think I said that a lot last time. But like, to me, there's not really a point in arguing with someone about their beliefs,
right?
Because like,
and see, that's the thing is, I don't want this to spur or feel like we're justifying a stance. This is exploratory, because like listening back to the past couple episodes, which I only got through the first one, I was just kind of running through a bunch of other things, but it's funny to hear people's perspectives and your experiences and how the two kind of govern one another. And so hearing somebody's outlook on things is fascinating to me. It's one of the reasons I like the show. It's one of the reasons why we have these conversations in the first place. And I don't think we've talked about this in nearly 200 episodes. I don't think we've talked about religions. Yeah. And we've talked about sort of what my fundamental flaws that I see in a lot of them is that they tend to try to overemphasize their own importance in things, where it could just be like, if you believe in a higher power, great. And I always felt like a personal relationship with God is a really fantastic thing if you have one, because it gives you a lot more clarity of thought. There's peace of mind there, and you can call it the opium of the masses or whatever you want to. But I'm sure, a lot of those, folks sleep better.
Oh, yeah.
In knowing that there is a guiding hand governing, whereas I have more of the Neo perspective of just like, I don't like feeling like I'm not in control of my own life.
Yeah.
And those are the funny aspects where but my car breaks down and I sure as shit want somebody else to intervene, right? So, but in any event, so I will go back to Michael and I'll let you run from that. But it was just, I don't expect for you to say like, well, this is why I feel this way. It's just, I was curious because I don't think we've ever discussed this.
You are right. We have not, honestly, I did not really take you as agnostic. I mean, like, if I were to sit and pour over the close to 200 episodes, like a lore master of our podcast could probably say, well, actually, in these 5 episodes, he alluded to it. But like, I don't think you've ever outright like said definitively that is your stance. But I mean, like, it was never my business. I've always taken religion to be a very personal thing, which like, and I think that's by way of my parents, is like how they raised me. My parents are very anti-authoritarian when it comes to religion. They're very against organized religion because they're like, well, I don't want someone else telling me how I should worship, how I should believe. And so I kind of took that a step further and just not having anything to worship or believe. But like, I understand if other people do. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, here's the 10 reasons why you're wrong. Like, I was never, was it the phrase that I heard in college, a militant atheist? Yes. I was never one of those people that's like, well, I believe this way, and now I need to convert you to that. Because, like, that word, I convert, is very reminiscent.
It's triggering. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like, convert. Like, because that's, if you believe in that, like, as long as you're not trying to tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, I don't.
Well, that's the problem, though, is that a lot of religion is doing that.
Which is true.
Not necessarily what you're doing, but what other people are doing as well.
Which is very true.
So, so that's where I've never been a militant atheist, just because I think, and this isn't to step on people's toes, but I think that religious people lack some critical thinking skills.
Yes. Which is the thing that I think both you and I appreciate being Pastafarians from that perspective, and why Satanism is really alluring to me as well, is that it does tell you are somewhat reliant upon your own mental acuity to function and thrive, which is why magic, I think, is also alluring to some people, because it's that same principle that you can have a general impact on the outcome, as opposed to just saying, well, got to toss it up to God. I'm a deathbed repentance kind of person. Like, those things really bother me as well.
And that's why I don't bother with in terms of converting anybody, because to me, it's, you're just pissing into the wind, because you're not actually going to succeed on it. So you're really just wasting your own breath. But I do tend to not necessarily like judge, but I do have some preconceived notions usually when I'm talking to somebody that, comes across as very like staunchly religious, and it is a definitive part of their personality and how they define themselves.
Understandable.
First I'm a Christian, then I'm a conservative, then I'm a whatever, right? If that's one of your labels that you are putting on yourself, I'm like, okay, I could probably assume a couple things that I'm probably going to disagree with.
And it's also in instances where they're in the middle of a hypocritical rant in the middle of that, by justifying by saying, first off, the caveat is, I'm a Christian. How dare you say that? I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, like, I'm not a racist, but...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But so it's an interesting sort of like spool to get around to how I finished up the end of this voyage was my car... I had to take it to a shop that was relatively close, but it's about a mile away from my apartment, which it's uphill walking. And I would drop it off. And because of COVID, they do not allow folks to be in the shop, funnily enough. So as I said previously, there were no restrictions. This shop in particular was just like, yeah, we don't allow folks to stay. So, and I'm like, I'm that cheap bastard who is like, I'm not calling an Uber, I'm just gonna walk home.
Yeah, it's a mile. It's not terrible.
Yeah, it's a mile. It's not bad. Total downpour both times. No. And so as I was walking in the rain both ways, and I'm just laughing at myself. I was like, yep, this is what you get for being cheap, asshole. And then I got it back, took it home. It died again when I got to the apartment complex. It was fine all the way back. Got into the parking lot, died on me right in the same spot, and I'm like, okay, so either the devil has taken over this segment of ground, or there's just something about this. So then I had to take it back in, get it worked on again, and all of this goes to finally saying the funniest circumstance is all the other work that they did. They're like, oh, everything should be fine now. Wasn't. They discovered upon the second look through that under one of my solenoids, human hair had gotten attached to one of the prongs, and so it was not able to make a full connection, and so that was what was causing it to stall out. And this is, I have had that through the entire trek of the 1,200 miles to get from Arizona to Oregon. I drove with that like that. Had no problems whatsoever. Got 3 months into living up here before that finally reared its ugly head. So really weird, just like the nonsense that happens just, despite itself, where you go,
God's
like,
giving you a sign.
Not even that. It's more, it was a funny joke to get through the whole nonsense to lead into a grander conversation. But I just was like, all of that is the separation of several human hairs, goes from something functioning perfectly to it going completely off the rails. And just that, if there's a metaphor in there somewhere, but our lives are held in the balance by the separation of, a couple
but for
hairs.
The grace of God.
Exactly. So it was an interesting set of circumstances to finally get around to. That is why I did not feel like recording shows, because I had been running through all that. My Achilles was giving me problems. I'm an old man falling to pieces, walking through the rain, just scouring through scores of things in the Salvation Army just to pass the time. So it's I don't want to walk home in the rain again. And then oh, fuck it. I can't look at this swath of Dean Koontz books for any longer than I have already. But so there you go. That was our age of spiritual machines.
I'm definitely with you. I have often thought about the, not necessarily hair, but the inches in which can change things so drastically. I think I've referenced previously, maybe not, but in September of 2019, I got in a car accident, and I was at a stop sign, and I was going to make a right, and a truck was slowing down to turn in, and so what I should have done was, of course, wait for the truck to do its turn, ensure everything was clear, and turn out. But I saw the truck was, had his blinker on, was slowing, and he was going to turn into the street that I was on, so I thought, perfect, I'm safe. And a Mustang that was zooming behind the truck didn't want to wait for the truck, so just quickly zoomed around the truck, which, of course, it's my fault because technically they had the right of way, right? Because I'm the one turning out.
They were in traffic, right?
Yeah, but, I didn't expect the car to come just zooming around the truck. And so
you were hoping for common courtesy.
Yeah, and so it hit me in my little Nissan Versa hatchback and totaled my car. Just like a tin can. And if it had been about 11 inches further, if I had just moved out 11 inches further into the turn, which is just a fraction of a second, right? Just a slight bit on the pedal, then I would have died. I would have been dead. Because the entire front of my car was just toast, and it stopped right around where my car door was. And so my whole car spins around, and the front's just a garbled mess. And I stumble out, and my ribs hurt from the jolt of the seatbelt, but I'm able to walk out fine. And even the Mustang guy, his car was perfectly or his car was messed, but he was perfectly fine. And he gets out and he's like, "Are you okay?" And like I said, if that 11 inches more, just a fraction of a second longer, when I had turned out, I'd be dead. But because I didn't, and that 11 inches was there, I'm just oh yeah, no, the only thing that hurts is my pride. and so it's just that I have often reflected on that, just because it all happened so quickly. Because I'm looking, cars, the truck's about to turn, I look over to make sure nobody's coming, going to step into the crosswalk, and then I turn out, and as I look back over, I just see the flash of red, and it's wow, yeah, it just is so surreal, because I'm it happened so quickly that there was no time for me to prep or do anything. Could have died, but
the proverbial blink of an eye, as it were.
Exactly. And so I have often reflected since then of just how quickly things can turn.
Yeah.
And then you immediately went onto YouTube and watched the music video for POD.
See, you go
alive.
You go that way, and I was chuckling because in the midst of his harrowing circumstances, I went to the hero's reference of Nissan Versa. So
yes.
So thank you for that. That was a nice pop. But yeah, it's so weird to then contemplate, how fragile we are. And then this grand galactic sense of self was one of the reasons why I love True Detective. I think the sort of nihilistic Rustin Cole sort of soliloquizing about the fact that, here we are these weird sentient, globs of meat walking around with this grand self-imposed sense of grandiosity. Everything means something. It's all for me, right? And my story is perfectly indicative of that, of just well, obviously the cosmos stopped because my car needed to make it another, 800 and 900 yards. But it's so silly to, give yourself that air of importance that oh, well, obviously this is all for me, right? It's just, and so more often than not, I always look at things as it's just the grand confluence of events, and certain particles move a certain way at a certain time.
Well, see, it's interesting that you say that, because I thought very much that same thing earlier when you said that you're sure that the religious folks sleep better at night. Because I thought to myself, I would think it's the opposite. Because if I thought that I've been created by God and he has some sort of plan for me, and, you know, and then I'm thinking like, well, what's his plan? Why did he put me here? And then also I'm thinking like, why does God let certain things happen and not other things? Right. And why? And whereas me, I'm just like, none of this matters. We're here until we're not.
Okay.
And so be it. And so it's like,
otherwise you're on a runaway train, essentially.
Yeah. It's like, I would feel like the nihilistic attitude is not pessimistic, of course, but I feel like that would allow you to sleep better at night, because it doesn't matter if you have a bad day, because none of this really matters in the end.
Well, so like approaching it with the optimistic nihilism, which is the optimistic part is the most way is the best way to, you know, help yourself sleep at night. But
you
not
hope
a lot of
for
people,
the best, expect the worst.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But like that sort of nihilistic behavior, not a lot of people can handle that. When they're like people always innately want to feel like they are part of a story, like that has some sort of payoff. And I feel like that's why, to Shane's point, why a lot of people that are religious are able to sleep better at night, for, you know, lack of a better phrase.
Those people just need to watch Pulp Fiction, because that's just their ego fucking with them. If they think they age like
they're
wine,
thinking their ass going to age like wine. If it means that it turns to vinegar, it do. If you think it gets better with age, it don't.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, it's what's funny is to Michael's point on that. I think part of my sort of cresting into middle age has really kind of helped fortify a lot of my thoughts. I don't care if there is a continuing story. And more often than not these days, like, I find I'm tapping out of a lot of that egocentric sort of way of thinking that I had held onto in my 20s, certainly. Where like, oh, this has got to mean something. I got to do something. Like on my 18th birthday, I was in Vegas, and I looked up at the Hard Rock Cafe. There's another fun story. If I haven't told you about my parents took me to Las Vegas when I turned 18. Everybody else had fun but me.
Oh, no. I mean, that sounds about right.
It's a good way for us to wind up. I'll finish with that story. But I was looking at the Hard Rock, and I was like, I'm going to play there before I'm 25. Like, that is the goal. I did not make that. I didn't clear that at all. I've played venues that were much bigger and had far greater importance, and I've done things that, to my barometer, were a lot greater accomplishments. But then I look back at it as like, well, see, but you failed on the thing that you set in front of yourself. And I'm like, so when you look at life, I feel like if you just, so many people keep moving the goalposts on themselves, right? Like, if I missed, like, oh, well, I wasn't supposed to do that anyway. Or if you make it as like, okay, well, I have to go another step afield and another step further and another step further. And not to tell your story, Doc, but as like, you've endured some pretty harrowing circumstances to then get where you are now. And to have your perspective on a lot of things, I find very uplifting and enlightening. And I appreciate a lot of that, which is why these days I'm more comforted by the concept of coming on here and just having a conversation and chatting, because it's so funny what we discover about one another in the course of having these exchanges, versus feeling like I got to come in with an agenda, we got to have, you know, a topic, and we need to be able to be the format of the show. Is like, this is a lot more fun for me to just sit, pick each other's brains. And, you know, the disinformation this week is whether or not you feel like, you know, you can believe in God and hate religion, or if you can hope for something to intercede, as opposed to saying, like, I don't just want to succumb to the dirt and become worm food, but I don't care one way or the other. It's just, for me, to put the final cap on my perspective is, I just, at this point, do not have the self-assurance to say, I know everything. And I can say with surety, there's no God. Or I can say with surety, oh, there's absolutely a God. It's like, I'm open to experiences. So, you know, come whatever may, if an apparition appears in front of me like 10 feet from my face, I'm not going to go,
the ghost of Christmas future.
Exactly. I'm not going to just turn it and go like, oh, this can't be possible, because, you know, physics teaches us. Like, I'm more of just, I'm going to roll with the punches and I'm going to see what happens. But you were saying something, Doc.
Oh, no, I was going to agree with you. It's because I have these, so quick little recap here. As you guys have known, like, I did a bunch of work in the backyard. I've got it like a nice little patio set up for myself. and the family. And so during the daytime, Cordelia, when she's kind of fussy and wants to nap, we'll just go outside and I'll pace around outside in the sun with her, and then she'll pass out on my shoulder. And so while I'm doing that with her, I'm just kind of walking outside, getting the fresh air, and just kind of lost in my own thoughts, right? Because I'm just trying to get her to sleep, so I have nothing else to do but think. And it's during those times that, like the other day, I was kind of lost in my own thoughts regarding the moving goalpost that you just mentioned, because, you know, for so long, in my younger days, you know, I had all these plans of like, I want to get the bachelor's degree, and then I want to do this as a career, and I want to, you know, get engaged by the time I'm 24, get engaged early, married by the time I'm 24, have kids by 26, etc. Right. And do all these plans. And then when life kind of went off a cliff, you know, then I was like, okay, well now I need to, you know, be the comeback kid. Right. And I like, you know, got to squirrel away my pennies and get to the certain stages of life. And so for so long I have had these goals, and I adjusted the goals as needed. But then, you know, what's the highest you can get for education? Okay, well, you get your doctorate. Okay, well, I've got that. And then what are we supposed to do, quote unquote, for the American dream, right? We're supposed to, like, you know, own a house and have a family, right?
And a lift in the world championship, baby.
Yeah.
Different American dream. Sorry.
Yeah. But it's like, so I got a house, I have the doctorate, I've got the family. And so it's like, and for so long, these were goals that I was chasing. And so it's, you know, it gave you that drive and that, you know, like, oh, once I get there, things will feel different, right? Like, you know, once I hit that goal. And then now I'm here and it's like, well, no, it's the same as ever. Like, you know, life doesn't change. And so I think, to your point about people shifting the goalposts, I think that's a large part of the problem. Is I think that people just need to get comfortable in their own skin and where they're at now, because rather than saying, okay, well, what's next? What's the next goal I conquer? Instead, I'm just like, man, I just want to crack a bottle of wine. Like yesterday, I opened a bottle of wine. I just bought a grill. So I bought some steaks, tossed the steaks on the grill. It was my first time grilling steaks like outside, because I've never had a grill and stuff. Yeah. So I was just like, man, I got this badass grill. I got steaks cooking on it. I made homemade jalapeno poppers. Hadn't done that before. Ooh. Yeah. And so I got those on the grill. I'm sitting outside. I bought like a portable speaker, a big giant thing that connects to another one. So I got it on either side of the patio there. So I'm like playing the doors, drinking my wine, cooking the steaks and jalapeno poppers. And I'm like, what other goals do I need to chase? This is awesome. I just need good food, good wine, good music, and, you know, call it a day.
The only thing you carry into the ground with you are your experiences, my friend. And that, yeah, it's something I definitely am starting to emphasize and cherish a lot as I start to kind of change my perspective on reality going forward. Is, yeah, it's very much similar. Just like, hey, I'm having a great meal. I'm enjoying my wife's company. I'm having a great conversation with my friends where we can sit and peel open the, you know, onions that are our brains and sort of get to the gray meat of the matter. And I think that's fantastic. So, and now Michael's off to chase his aspirations and split the atom.
I just want to graduate. That's all I want.
Want to get to that goalpost.
That's my only goalpost. And like beyond that, I've graduated. That's more than I could say.
All right.
Check the box. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, speaking of perspectives, have you guys ever seen the film Gaslight? The Gaslighting or Gaslight?
Are you gaslighting me on the movie Gaslight? Are you telling me I should see it?
Well,
I'm saying it doesn't exist.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Well, so it's like a 1942 film and then was remade in 44. I saw the 44 version. It came, you know, only 2 years later. I saw the 44 version just the other night.
How fucking old are you?
He saw it when it was in theaters.
So only 2 years later. I had just escaped the Nazis, and I thought, you know, fuck it. I'm going to go watch a movie.
I'm going to watch a talkie. I heard about them. They're pretty cool. They're pretty new.
I like it when the lights go down. It's just me and my ghosts.
I was going to say you guys are film buffs, but not so much Michael. But Shane, you like it.
I do enjoy cinema from time to time, but as we've proven, apparently, I don't like the right cinema, and that's important. And the wrong cinema, for those who are keeping track, is Kirsten cinema. So just, you know, check that off of the books.
Through that.
Anyway.
Well, I was just thinking because, like, you know, we were talking about perspectives, and obviously the term gaslighting is very popular today and utilized. And I had never seen the film, so it was, I thought, oh, what the heck? It's on HBO. So I thought, oh, what the heck? Why not give it a shot? And it was really good. So highly recommend. And is, you know, kind of neat just to because even though it is like, 80 years old now, I can really actually see why the term gaslighting is so popular, just because the actions in the film, you're like, oh, I see people do this kind of stuff all the time to people and make them question their own perspectives and distrust their own memory.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just, kind of ties in with our conversation about religion and stuff, because, if you start to question your own judgments, your own self, and like not believe, believe your own eyes,
mm-hmm.
It's very easy to get manipulated by other people.
Well, you talk about science and things sort of being able to cultivate a greater understanding. Like, I was just listening to a last pod episode, and I'm going to forget the individual's name, but it's kind of a lesser known killer, but he was somebody who had schizophrenia in the 60s and 70s. And, went undiagnosed, and he was having full-on hallucinations that were spurring him into the acts that he was doing, which was like, burn your house down around you, go out and kill. God has sort of dubbed you the angel of death. Go kill every human being on the planet. But first you needed to cut their penises off in order to, ensure that they kept propagating, like, weird shit happening. And, no one, he just, to all external appearances, seemed like a perfectly reasonable, rational person who would then beat his children behind closed doors. And,
Isn't that the way it always is, though? The neighbors and stuff are just like,
it seems how everybody,
like the nicest guy.
If we've learned, they did not say that for another Philadelphia killer that we've talked about on this particular show. Like, that guy seemed crazy. He shot a cop in the front yard. He was boiling heads on his stoves. Go back and look in the archives, kids. There's some glorious, material for you to catch up on there. But where I was rounding into with all of this nonsense is just it's strange, the greater understanding that we get of people's circumstances and what can impact your perspective as well. So looking back at a film about gaslighting somebody from the 40s versus, what the current iterative phase of is like, just telling somebody a joke and lulling them into a false sense of security about a joke. Oh, you're gaslighting me. It's like, okay, context is really important. Circumstances are really important to understand, and I think we lose a lot of that with empathy, or a lack thereof, as much as we claim that we are all empathic creatures these days.
Well,
so much of people's conduct. So anyway, we went on a very meandering and serpentine path through the course of this discussion, but I think I have a great idea to wrap this episode up and give us a hook into ensuring that we have got some After Dark fodder going further.
Ooh, I got the goosebumps.
Get excited.
Ooh.
We can say, if you're interested in hearing what happened to Shane, the stodgiest and stiffest of starched shirts at age 18 in Las Vegas, you can join us over on the Tubes of You, and we'll have a brief discussion about, what I thought about the last couple episodes, because I feel like there were some discussion points that we can touch on. But I do feel...
Didn't you already admit that you only listened to part of the first one and then tapped out?
I got into some discussion about the Harry Potter fandom in the second episode as well, but I just didn't finish it. So, but, and I also have held to the belief that, one, if you're not on the show, you don't necessarily get to interject your opinion, because if you weren't around, like, shut the hell up.
I clearly didn't have that opinion, which is how I ended up on the show.
Exactly. But for me, like, it's fun to audit and then, just have to be subject to, which is where you and I started having conversations online, because you wanted to be a part of the conversation. But I feel like it's fun to cause that to go elsewhere and germinate offline, which is why you're not a host.
Wow.
I'm kidding.
Wow.
No, you said that I couldn't take it back, and I can tell you I will take it back whenever I damn well please. But no, I will talk about my perspective as to what constitutes a host of this show or does not, and that'll be a fun bit of discourse.
Ooh, okay, now I also am going to YouTube to see this conversation.
It'll be fun. And then you can hear about what happened to me in Vegas when I was at the tender age of 18, just, blooming into manhood.
And for those of you currently on the way to turning 18 years old, instead of going to Vegas, where you too will have no fun, make your way to Alberta, Canada, where the legal drinking age is 18 years old.
You don't have to get drunk to have a good time, Michael.
He's
I don't think the other Mike. Yeah,
I
was going to say. Well, that's what I was saying. Is I don't think the other Michael would agree with you based on the conversation earlier.
He's talking to me.
I saw his eyes light up when he's like, "I could have been drunk this whole time."
Oh man.
Oh, losses. But so also, I was going to hark back on something that we just completely blew by, but I'm going to call it up. Like, do you think that ghetto blaster is an appropriate term to use these days?
Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you,
bastards. Okay,
the only reason I asked
saw your eyebrows raised.
I was joking about this with Melissa because I was watching. There's a lot of discussion about like homeless encampments in San Francisco in particular, or Oakland, yes. And then there's a lot of stuff around Portland where there's some pretty radical things happening. A lot of break-ins and folks talking about there's a new term, which to me is a new term. Here's privileged white male again.
People experiencing homelessness?
They refer to them as the unhoused.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Mm-hmm. I've heard that. I've heard don't call them homeless. I've heard say they're experiencing homelessness, but unhoused is new.
Yeah, the unhoused is so. In all of the news reports that I saw over the past like 3 or 4 days, they're referring to this. So the unhoused in the area, and I went, wow, that's a new one. So as much as we talk about, one, people looking to be offended, but also that we continually are now really retconning and choosing our language a little bit more purposefully these days, which I can both appreciate and sort of rail against because, again, white man. But it's one of those, it's interesting when you have to, as a lover of language, I appreciate the forethought that is necessary in order to function these days. But at the same time, I do kind of laugh that, okay, if you're going to refer to a wife beater shirt, well, what is that? Okay, no, it's a guinea tee. No, can't say that. Boop. Like, what do you call those things? A tank top. Oh, okay. But,
I agree that a wife beater should be retired. I also would say that I should probably remove ghetto blaster from my lexicon.
Okay.
I would. So I saw your eyebrows raised when I said it, and the moment it left my lips and I saw both of you make a little face, I thought to myself, I should have said stereo. I thought that in my head, and I was like, just keep going. Don't draw attention to it, and the conversation will move on. But I would say that it is just something that, it's what they called it when I was a kid.
I know.
And
here's the funny thing about the guy who is normally trying to be like in the day before, nicer, kinder, gentler Shane came along, the incendiary guy who was just trying to make Michael have to bleep as many things as possible on the episode by using words like giddy, which I shouldn't have said either. So we'll just run any way you want to. But like, I also find that people who are thwarted by language to the fact that like just the word bothers them just in and of itself, and you grasp your pearls and scream like you just saw a rat running across the floor. I'm like, we can go dovetail. This is why I love this show. We start and then we'll never stop.
Well, just to touch on what you were saying real quick. So I agree, ghetto blaster should get retired. That's just something that exists from back in the day when I was a kid. I have since removed certain language.
Here's the apology coming.
Well, like when I was in high school. Yeah, well, when I was in high school, big thing that people would say is like, like let's say you got shortchanged, you'd be like, oh man, you got gypped by the cashier, or oh, you got Jewed by the cashier. And like in retrospect, like at the time you're like 14 years old, you're not associating the term, oh, you got Jewed with like Jewish people and all the negative connotations.
You don't think about
stereotypes.
Well,
and so
I mean, gyp is also
that's why I brought it up. Gypsies and stuff. Exactly. You don't think about either one of those, and it was only later when I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. And now that I know, we know better, we do better. Yeah. That being said, with regards to the homeless versus unhoused bit, I would rally against that. I was, to me, that is a way of distracting from the actual conversation. People can start to talk, oh, we should refer to them as unhoused because it's not reflective of their feelings if we say they're homeless and stuff. I'm like, they trust me, I know.
They have
don't
bigger
give a
fish
shit
to fry.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, for those 18 months, I didn't give a shit what you called me. Just feed me.
Yeah.
I think because I've actually heard that term for a couple of years now in the podcasts I listen to and stuff like that. And I think the main difference between them is that people can find a home, especially like it doesn't necessarily have to be a shelter of sorts. It can be a home as in like they are part of the encampment, because there are people that are totally okay with living in these encampments.
That's the community.
Yeah, because that's the community. That's something that I've been following a lot with the people that have been part of the forest defense in Atlanta, which is the Stop Cop City movement and everything that's going on, which is a big thing that I don't want to talk about right now. But the idea is that like you can still have a home, but you can be still on the street of sort. And it's not necessarily saying that you can't say homeless, but that people, like some people would rather prefer them call themselves unhoused because they don't necessarily have a permanent shelter, but they still have a place of community, a place of belonging. And I think it's mainly just like the argument
it's
of
semantics,
like, I'm
gonna rally against it still, because again, I'm a far cry from that. But I would say that of us, and probably and all the people that I've heard having those conversations, same thing applies to them. Of them, I'm probably a little bit more like knowledgeable of the subject, and at least in my experience, which again, I don't claim to speak on behalf of all people in there,
right.
But in my experience and the people that I interacted with at the time, we never sat around talking about what would we like to be called.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's not a club.
And if somebody was like, Mike, you're homeless, I would never be like, how dare you?
I think that's I think that part is like the idea that people would be offended or upset by the use of the term experiencing homelessness or something like that. And that's like the difference. Like to me, it does as a with all the privilege, it doesn't matter to me so much. But I know some people would prefer the term unhoused because there's still that sense of community. It's if you argue that house is the same thing as a home, or if there is a difference. I think that's the main reason why people would prefer unhoused and not.
Right.
If you don't see a difference, then it doesn't necessarily
Well, if you're going around calling them community-less, then I'd be like, oh, that's kind of harsh. I mean, they got their own community. And
that's fair.
But
yeah.
Like if we were saying, oh, these poor community-less people, then I'd be like, ooh, that's kind of harsh. But if we're going to get into the semantics of don't call them homeless, call them unhoused, because a house isn't a home. And I'm like, well, it kind of isn't the same thing. Like I bought a home, but I also bought a house. I mean, so then you're getting into the weeds of it. And I'm
So to act as an arbitrator, what I will say is I think, one, I can appreciate people who are actively trying to recalibrate their brains and to help to be warmer and gentler and kind and consider other people's feelings. Mm-hmm. So I'll applaud anybody who takes steps to actively course correct themselves. And so it was like teachable moment.
Yeah, yes and no. If you're going to rally against it and hop on a podcast and say something, I would say, how about you buy some Wonder Bread, some peanut butter and jelly, make some sandwiches and go hand those out. Then you're actually doing something. I'll applaud that. But words are wind. They don't mean anything.
But, the sentiment I can appreciate. If we're taking an ethical stance, if you're not, inactivity, yes, is kind of attrition in and of itself. But at the same time, I think like if you're, the first rule of being a doctor here and you being one, first do no harm. I think if that is something we can all adopt, is at least just in our day-to-day life, if I'm not actively trying to step on people's toes, which if you listen to episodes of this show from a year ago is a dramatically different stance, but like trying to be comedically incendiary to get a laugh versus how I actually comport myself out in the world is, that I think if anybody's out there just trying to be decent, I'm not going to harangue somebody for that. But if you are taking somebody to task for not saying, the appropriate term, I do somewhat question what your motivation is for that. And I do agree that cynicism does extend into my own brain. I just don't feel impassioned enough about it to be like, well, let me tell you why you shouldn't use this. I was like, if you're making a step, cool. Yeah,
well, I mean, listen, I'm getting old too. Like I was a millennial homeless or unhoused person. So
I thought you were going to say
I don't know what the
millennial.
Gen Z unhoused people want. Like maybe the youngins that are without a home right now or without a house or whatever. Maybe they would get incensed to being called homeless. Maybe
you're talking about like freegans as well, who by rationale willfully take that on themselves, and that is an ethos that they're espousing. So maybe they would get offended. Who knows? To your point, yeah. But we've spooled out another 10 minutes after I said that I was going to cut this thing off. So to keep us within our usual regimented time frame, for all of you who are out there, we thank you for being here as always. We love and appreciate you for listening, and it truly it enriches our lives when you are here and take part and exchange. And that's how Michael got on the show. It's how Jess is here and having conversations with us. So we love and appreciate. And Melanie, my good friend, was clamoring for just a single show where she and Doc talk about Star Trek. So if you look at our Instagram,
I would love that,
comments.
and then we could get people to bump that on their ghetto blast. Oh, cut this.
Live long and prosper my ass, apparently. But so I think we appreciate you all being here, and maybe we can make that happen. So Melanie, if you're still running, we'll see what we can do to facilitate that, and then I'll return to my having Star Wars discussions elsewhere. But for those of you who want to catch up with us, yes. There is a link in the show notes that'll take you to all of our relevant or irrelevant socials. You can find us there, including YouTube, where we usually are going to have content. Typically Fridays at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, just to keep you engaged there. But that's our after dark or before dawn, as I'm calling our pre-roll things, and try to keep things entertaining and engrossing. And Michael's trying to get them shorts back active, but folks aren't picking them up anymore.
They flopped hard.
But we'll see if we can get that improved. So, if you want to hear me talk about Vegas and craziness and what my thoughts were on the last couple of weeks' episode, come join us on YouTube in the upcoming Friday milieu so that we can have fun and enjoy ourselves there. But to wrap things up for the Disinformed podcast this evening, I will steal my old catchphrase to keep it in the more saintly behavior that I was talking about and say that I hope something great happens to you today. And for the Disinformed podcast this week, I'm Shane.
And I'm Michael. And zippity zoop, we're out of here.
Oh, it was so rewarding when I got to do that last week.
I'm sure that you were just creaming your jeans.